Welcome to the Negotiator channel. I have Keir Giles. Giles, how does it go?
When we're here, it goes however you like. Keir Giles is perfectly fine.
And this is, I was 13 years in London, and now there's two Keirs, one in the Prime Minister and of course you. I mean, is that, can this be a coincidence?
Well, if it's confusing for you, think what it's like for me. The first couple of months, every time I see in the newspaper headlines, Keir has done this or that, and I have a little momentary heart attack before I realize it's the other Keir who is now Prime Minister.
Yeah, but great to have you here in the eastern front of Finland, of NATO Europe, and you have just published the Finnish version of the Who Will Defend Europe? An awakened Russia and a sleeping continent, and this is available at Docendo in the Finnish. So this is your third book?
It's the third commercially published book, and it's actually the third one that has been translated into Finnish by Docendo, so there's a bit of a pattern there. But there's a lot of other work that it draws on that has come out through think tanks and NATO centers and so on. Plenty more publications. This is just the third book that you can get in a bookshop.
Yeah, and we have to start with the elephant in the room. I should rename our WhatsApp channel to, what's that, like a deep OPSEC.
PC small group, yes. We are clear for OPSEC, definitely. Every channel I've been on this morning has been renamed as this in tribute to this signal disaster that has happened in the United States.
That's, I mean, for us freeloading Europeans, that's so hilarious and so, I don't know, Monty Python couldn't write a better like a joke on this one. It's just beyond incompetence.
Yes, it is so catastrophic that all you can do is laugh.
Yeah. So basically there was American journalist was invited to a high top OPSEC signal group to discuss imminent Houthi attacks, and he thought this must be a joke or some kind of psyop by the Republicans, and no, it wasn't. It was real.
Yes.
And we saw some crazy messages. For example, J.D. Vance said that he doesn't quite like to support the free-loading Europeans with their shipping routes, why they should pay for this. I mean, they truly are transactionals in the USA.
Well, I think that's not always the most helpful way to describe it, because there are so many different layers of disaster that are unpacking one after the other with this thing. There's the fact that they are discussing these plans on what is effectively a public commercial service rather than deep inside a skiff, a secret facility where they should be discussed. And as many people have pointed out, anybody of lower rank that did that would be instantly fired, arrested, would probably spend the rest of their life in jail, and yet there's no accountability for this top level of the US administration at the moment. That's one problem. Then there is the cavalier way in which they're discussing the strikes and the reasons for the strikes, which they take it as perfectly normal and natural that the United States will carry out airstrikes to murder a certain number of people and then everything will be okay, which runs counter to the assessments that we've heard from other countries as well. Then peel off another layer, and there's why they're doing it, and it's the attitude to Europe. First of all, that Europe should be presented with a bill afterwards for doing this, and second, that they want to do it without actually asking Europe in the first place. So it's like walking into a restaurant and being presented with the most expensive dish on the menu without ordering it, and then they demand the bill. Regardless of the fact that this airstrike may not actually make anything any better, because after all, Saudi Arabia has been trying to do much the same thing for years.
Yeah, all we can do is send 2 prayers and American flags for our brothers. But it is transactional, and I'm an investment banker, so I have a right-leaning sympathies for the business side, and I even like some of the Doge stuff Elon Musk is doing. But I mean, it's very, very, very hard not to dislike these guys with intensity. It's because it's the incompetence and it's the malice. And it's the transactional nature that everything needs to get an immediate payoff, and then on Ukraine, which is your book's main theme, obviously Russia has that, but even they're kind of the single-mindedly ruthless. They just I don't know what they want. They just want to be back to be a superpower and have the Soviet era glory back or something. But I mean, they at least sort of openly evil.
Let's consider the difference. There's a spirit of revenge which is driving both the Trump-Musk administration and Putin. But Trump-Musk administration also wants to get rich, to channel national wealth into an oligarchy, whereas Putin doesn't need to do that. He's already completed that process within Russia. If you take away that difference, then it's very much the same that they're doing. And this comes through in all sorts of unexpected ways, like the language Trump is using towards Canada being almost exactly the same as the language Putin used towards Ukraine, about this being a fictional country, about the dividing lines being artificial, about reabsorption. It's the same thing. It's the same ideological sympathies between the two of them. And that, of course, is one of the most alarming points for people who previously depended on the United States as a friend or a partner or an ally.
Yeah, this too shall pass. I mean, it's only for 4 years, I think. But
I'm not sure. I've heard people even being quite optimistic, saying that this will only last until 2 years because there will be midterm elections in the United States, and then it will be a lame duck presidency because obviously nobody's going to vote for more of the same. I think that underestimates the pace and the scale of change that we've seen in the United States. Let's not assume that there will be midterm elections. Or if there are, let's not assume who is going to be counting the votes.
But your book asks a very valid question, who will defend Europe? I mean, if the transatlantic or even NATO partnership is not it, then I guess it must be us. And then we Finns, I guess, in your book you are very complimentary on the border nations, Poland and Finland. Why is that?
Well, the answer to the question, who will defend Europe, the reason why I asked the question in the first place when writing this book about a year ago now was because of the three trends that were very obvious. It was Russian determination, it was American disengagement, which was already very clear even before we had Trump in power, and it was Western European blissful ignorance of the problem and disregarding the challenge altogether, refusing to recognize the challenge that was coming and preparing for it in terms of defense spending. So when we say Europe, will defend Europe, and in particular the subtitle of the book, The Sleeping Continent, that's a bit too much of a generalization because, of course, you've still got this enormous gradient across the continent from east to west in terms of recognition of the danger of Russia. And it is, as a result, the frontline states which are best prepared to meet the challenge because they understand the threat from the eastern neighbor and they understand what happens if that threat is not countered, because within living memory, particularly in those states that were part of the communist bloc, they understand precisely what this means, so they know what that savage Russian military occupation in the east of south of Ukraine actually means for the people living there. So that's why the case studies in the book of how to do it right all tend to come from the easternmost part of the continent. And I singled out two in particular for demonstrating that it is actually possible to do the things that are necessary to make yourself a hard target for Russia. I chose Poland for the defense spending because, of course, they were among the forerunners in Europe for massive transformational investments in defense in order to make themselves a deterrent, and if deterrence fails, to withstand the consequences. And of course, Finland, and I know often Finns get terribly bored of being held up as best practice in this instance, but as civil society resilience and comprehensive defense and being prepared to keep vital functions of society working when Russia is doing its very best to stop them working. So case studies of best practice, which you can't transfer like for like onto other countries in Europe, but they do stand as a demonstration that this is possible, even when countries like the United Kingdom are saying it is impossible.
Yeah, I interviewed the top mayor candidates for Helsinki. We are having a election, and one of them said that there has never been more interest in visiting the Finnish bunkers, which are kind of masqueraded as a sports halls underground, and it's the prepper paradise. I mean, all these like the tube stations, they have tunnels are made in the ways which will block the nuclear waves, and you can put steel barriers on there, and nobody else has this stuff, and it's just like a commonplace. I'm a trained combat soldier because we have conscription, and now people are waking up. Then to think about the French, everybody kind of thought de Gaulle and the French were a bit like a isolationist when they thought, well, we have to have our own own nuclear capabilities and independent army. And of course, UK has always been kind of an independently proud nation. But that those you two are our only nuclear deterrents in Europe.
Yes, 1.5 nuclear deterrents, because, of course, that French emphasis on sovereign capability means that there are no questions currently being asked about whether the French would be able to maintain and then use their independent so-called nuclear deterrent. Whereas in the UK, there are lots of questions about that, similar to the debate about F-35s. Countries that have purchased it now wondering what happens if there is not US cooperation in operating and maintaining them, and how long the fleet actually can remain in being and effective if they don't get that support from the United States. So again, it's thinking of de Gaulle, it has proved the value of that sovereign capability that France has always maintained, but other countries have not felt the need to, which, let's not criticize the decision unfairly. It was perfectly normal and natural and rational to assume that the United States was actually always going to be on the side of democracies. So that was not a mistake. It is a force of nature that has changed the circumstances.
Yeah, and I mean, it's actually in the age of artificial intelligence, it's frankly not so high-tech. I mean, Finland has 5 highly functional, super modern nuclear power plant facilities. I don't have any doubt at all we would be able to do what Israel did like 30 years ago and produce a couple of nuclear bombs. And if you look at the Ukraine, who was cruelly betrayed by gave up all these nuclear weapons for international guarantees by Russia and USA, and I guess the good old Britain was there in the mix as well. And I mean, you start to wonder, like, is there any point on this? Nobody respects any international agreements.
Well, that is precisely the point. If the United States, which has been the core, the underpinning of the rules-based international order and stood against aggression when it was carried out by anybody else, if that is now pulled out from underneath the foundations of the entire system, then yes, it is a free-for-all. And I'm no nuclear weapons technologist, but the people who are and understand these things tell me that in terms of countries now developing their own nuclear weapons because it is their own guarantee of sovereignty against a nuclear-powered state that has aggressive intent towards them, out of all of the different nuclear industries across the free world, it's actually Canada, which has the type of reactors that are most suited to rapid transition to generating weapons-grade material. But that's the easy part. There's a great deal more that needs to be done after that is extremely technically challenging, and more so than you get from the anarchist's cookbook.
Yeah, and then this coming back on this sorry state of signal war by signal groups, the Houthis were attacked because they were kind of blocking the sea freedom of the seas, but that was kind of a precursor of going against Iran and kind of destroying their nuclear ambitions. But I mean, that's one way to do it. You just sort of bomb everybody who tries to do it. But I mean, how much easier would have been to just to give the 70 years of trust and transnational sort of nuclear umbrella and just play it by the book. I mean, this is crazy.
Yeah, there are a lot of things going on that will be deeply, deeply counterproductive for what the US administration says it wants to achieve. But there's a very big difference between the stated aims and what the actual direction of travel is for where the US is going. And the real implication of so many of these US policies that we see at the moment, both domestically and internationally, is really just eroding the United States' capacity to protect its own national interests. And that is, at home, eroding the interests of the state in favor of a very, very small group of individuals that become richer. And abroad, it is all of the institutions and all of the partnerships and the alliances that actually kept the United States prosperous and secure, as well as the network of other countries that were within it. So all of that is being chopped down incredibly rapidly now. And as a result, the United States is going to be a very different country in a very short space of time, and a significantly poorer one overall, with the exception of the super rich who stand to benefit from all of this.
Yeah, and there's I mean, I started the U.S. Republican administration times which perversely I was kind of relieved, because I thought like the leftist thinking went too far, and it was looked like it's unliberal in a way. But now it's completely crazy. And I had a couple of Americans who as visitors here, and they offered this kind of out of the deal explanation, Donald Trump's and administration, that you start with the fist and you put all these tariffs and you play tough and you make the Europeans pull their weight, and then you extend it to a handshake, and then you're off. But I mean, there's a little bit of that. I mean, we Europeans are taking this deadly seriously now. I think Germans just passed kill their own budget deficit break with 2/3 vote on the parliament, passing parliament, and then the new parliament to get 500 billion spending bill. So Germans, who are very frugal and of course are tormented by war, very pacifistic, they are rearming.
Well, not yet.
Okay.
They've promised to do this before. Does anybody remember Zeitenwende and what was supposed to happen then? So let's accept and welcome all of these statements that we see from Germany, from other European countries about unlocking the funding to invest in defense, but let's not celebrate until we see it actually happen and bring about some kind of palpable improvement in their actual defense capacity.
And then we are awfully fragmented. EU was never meant to be a defense union, and I have very much doubt it will ever be. NATO is of course the solution, but if we now have the European NATO with a little bit of boots on the ground from the Americans, who nobody really trusts much, and then the command center. I had Pekka Toveri here, who I asked him directly, like, if he plug off the Americans, can we do well? And he said we have certainly a lot of power and arms, but we are missing the intelligence and command center, and that's the Americans. And if they're doing this on this level of signal group competence, then I'm not sure if we are missing that much at the moment. But in reality, they have all these satellites. Elon Musk is running the Starlinks, and all the OPSEC and intelligence and command structures are run by Americans.
Yes, let's not confuse what the current leadership elite, a very small group of incompetent individuals, is doing with what the broad mass of the US government and particularly its armed forces are doing, because those are very, very different things. And again, they serve different interests. There is the small group, which is self-serving, and then there is the broader picture, which is more in tune with US national interest and how to protect it. The first book I wrote that was translated into Finnish was called Moscow Rules, and subtitle was What Drives Russia to Confront the West. And it was written in the early stages of the first Trump presidency, when these processes were very clear. There's disconnect between the White House and the broader US government, and the dedication in there, from memory, I think it said, to all those US government career officials who are doing their best to craft and deliver a sensible Russia policy while hoping that President Trump doesn't notice. Because it was very clear that as soon as he saw anything which embarrassed or disadvantaged Russia, he would squash it. Now, of course, you have a situation where Trump has come in with the same plan, but also with a plan for actually making sure that it is pushed through. So that rest of the levers of US power has been sidelined, and all of the headlines go to people discussing their war plans on a commercial platform, and nobody's really paying attention to what's happening with the rest of the United States. But that rest of the United States is already feeling the impact. You talked about the US presence in Europe and how essential it is to not just headquarters, but also organizationally. The backbone of some of the organizations in terms of administration and finance and logistics and everything that makes things work tends to rely heavily on Americans. But those Americans have already been hamstrung. They've been immobilized, not by an order not to move, but by bureaucratic means. They have travel bans, they have spending bans, all of the things that they would normally be doing to make US and NATO processes work are being suspended at the moment. So they are, in effect, blockaded without the direct and explicit order to do so.
Yeah, and then the sort of periphery agencies like USAID has been decimated, and it's certainly felt. I mean, if I read Trump correctly, he will start charging cost plus money for all the NATO bases and troops. He will probably start with the Baltic region, and there I must say, I mean, of course, Finland and Poland, we are kind of iron porcupines, to use the phrase coined by the EU leaders. But in the middle, the Baltics, that's extremely vulnerable.
That's right. And of course, they do have the multinational contingents from other NATO nations. You have the lead nations in each of those three Baltic states, the UK in Estonia, Canada in Latvia, Germany in Lithuania. So technically, it's not that dependent on a US presence. But all of those countries have always understood that it is the presence even of just one American soldier there that makes all the difference, because it is US power that Russia fears. So pull those out and you have a very different situation. That's the reason why all of these fait accompli scenarios, the idea that Russia will take a slice of territory of a neighboring state and then dig in and dare NATO to come and get them, are all suddenly now back in fashion. Some of them are no less nonsensical than they were the first time around, a decade ago, but they'd all gone quiet because NATO's enhanced forward presence was actually there, because there was never going to be a conversation about whether other NATO countries were involved if Russia did attack, because they were already involved, they were already physically present. Now there's the question mark over US commitment. Suddenly that's much less of a consideration, so people are considering many more options that have returned for Russia.
Yeah. Now, if you look at Ukraine, I mean, we started the topic of them having the nuclear weapons, and then that, of course, was a bad trade-off to give them away for these holy security guarantees. Then there were the Minsk agreements, not worth the paper they were written on. Of course, Putin just walk over them. And now we're having a go on some kind of a Minsk agreement type of thing brokered by some US real estate salesman and Putin's guys, and it doesn't look very good. They're having discussion in Saudi Arabia. I listened to that discussion with Tucker Carlson. Steve Witkoff, it didn't sound very convincing. He didn't even know the 4 regions of Ukraine under the occupation.
Well, Steve Witkoff, apparently everything he does know about this has been dictated to him by the Russian side. Which, of course, is an inevitable consequence if you sideline the person that actually knows the problem, Keith Kellogg, and you put in place somebody that is sufficiently ignorant about it that they will listen to the Russian side and take what they say as being true, or sufficiently cynical about it that they know they have been given the task of reaching peace by forcing Ukraine into surrender, and the best and speediest way of doing that is simply taking the Russian version of events and insisting and coercing Ukraine into acceptance of a surrender on Russia's terms. Either of those two options is possible, and both of them are disastrous for Europe.
Yeah, and I mean, this, of course, Zelensky, I mean, he was here in Finland and behaved quite well and got support, and I feel sorry for the guy. He's kind of little bit like the Churchill. Warring nation has they don't change prime ministers, but it's looking to me. I mean, that's one play in the book. I guess they just changed him at some point and then make the peace with that.
It will be another of Russia's demands that the United States will impose on Ukraine.
Mm. Yeah, so it's quite transactional. Then, of course, I don't know, the alternative is we will just use the combination of supplying weapons and intelligence to Ukraine from Europe with the lessened power from USA, and then we somehow convince the Americans to keep the economic pressure on. I guess that second part is also, I start to doubt whether this US administration is actually hell-bent on doing some deals with the Russians.
Well, yes, they are. And they've already talked about sanctions relief. They've already talked about re-establishing diplomatic relations, bringing in Russia from isolation and effectively rewarding them for the 11 years of aggression against Ukraine. It is a full rehabilitation of Moscow across every lever that the United States can actually reach. For example, not just challenging the International Criminal Court, that is, for whom Vladimir Putin is a wanted criminal, and now the International Criminal Court itself is being challenged by the United States, but also closing down the war crimes investigations against Russian individuals, or rather closing down the US support for those war crimes investigations in order to facilitate the commission of more Russian war crimes. Everywhere you look, it is the United States working very hard to help Russia out.
Yeah, I mean, it also looks like since Americans withdrew from World Health Organization and from the Paris, the climate accord, it's not beyond a possibility that they would withdraw from UN and Hague. I mean, it's just, I mean, it sounds crazy, but it's just the international order is not dead, but it's definitely shaking.
Well, it'll be a post-US international order. It'll be a situation where I doubt the US would actually withdraw from the United Nations, because Russia and China will point out that staying in actually gives you a substantial amount of power, because you can veto things that you don't want to happen in the UN. But what we do have instead is, as I wrote in the book, because it was plain enough coming this time last year, we've got the world's liberal democracies, not just Europe, but around the world, that are now faced with a challenge from not 2 but 3 autocratic powers. It's Russia, China, and the United States.
Yeah, that's quite a statement. I mean, it's tough. I mean, well, I guess the basic lesson is you have to have your own independent power. You can trust the international order and the agreements. I mean, we Finns and Poles, I think I feel safe in just by having the military competence and the will of the people. And then UK, you have your nuclear bombs, but you also write that the UK army is not in that great shape.
No, sadly, and this was, I knew it was not in great shape. Just how not great shape I didn't realize until I started pulling at the threads for researching the book. I also didn't realize until I had started to collect the instances of it, just how systematic the deceit of the British public and of its elected representative members of parliament had been from the Ministry of Defence, working so very hard to make sure that nobody found out just how bad things were. And one thing that surprised me after the book was published was the number of defense think tank and defense industry and military intelligence professionals who had worked with before and contacted me after the book was published to say that part was a surprise. Looking at the military capability of Western European countries, in particular the UK, told them information they didn't know previously. And that surprised me, because I thought, well, these people are in the industry, they're in the allied military intelligence services, they should know what the real situation is. Turns out the answer is no, because their job had always been to look at the enemy. They count Russian tanks, they work out how quickly Russia can move them, they look at what exactly the adversary capability is, whereas for their own friends and allies like the UK, they had more or less taken it on trust that what those friends and allies said about their own military power was more or less true and accurate. So to discover that actually there's been an enormous scam played out over a decade or more was startling for them and caused them to revise their estimates that they were feeding through to their own military chiefs in their own countries, including the United States.
Yeah, well, I was 13 years in London. Then I was a London City investment banker. I don't know if you get much love for those guys anymore, but I mean, I had.
I don't think there was ever much love for them.
yeah, we are just nice guys. I mean, it's. But then Tony Blair was there, and I even voted for Boris Johnson for mayor, and it was the great times in the 90s and early 2000s, and then Tony Blair kind of joined up with to fight Iraq with George W. Bush, and then it went downhill for him on his international stance. But now the other Keir Starmer, I mean, he's kind of trying to do the new Labour thing, but I mean, it looks weak economically. I mean, of course, the money. It's deficit and putting up the spending on the military is not exactly a Labour thing, so it's struggling.
Well, they've been through a bit of a transition. Now, usually when I write these books, the one part that turns out to be wrong is the part that was optimistic. And it's the same case here as well. At the time I was writing, the UK was coming up to an election, and the opposition defence secretary, who's now Secretary of Defence in the government, John Healey, was saying all the right things about needing to stand with Ukraine, about needing to invest in defence, about covering the gaps and strengthening our societal resilience. So I thought, okay, maybe he will have better luck at pushing that through the top layer of government than his predecessors from the Conservative Party did. But then, as soon as Labour arrived in power, it turned out they had very, very different priorities than national survival. It was a program of hard left socialist class warfare to punish entrepreneurship and success and aspiration and redirect national wealth to the public sector. So national defence, which was not counted as part of the public sector for these purposes, didn't look as though it was going to get any attention at all, and in fact was going to continue to be reduced rather than increased, as the UK had previously been encouraging other countries to do. There's been a slight change to that more recently as Starmer has come under more pressure, and it's become harder to deny that there is an immediate problem with the moves that we've seen from the United States. But still, the instincts of the British government is not to spend more, but to pretend that you're spending more. So if you are chasing a notional target, which is the percentage of GDP you spend on defense, which is relatively meaningless for assessing defense relevance, but we'll come on to that separately, no doubt, you can either spend more, or you can pretend that the security and intelligence services budget is now part of defense, and that means that you are spending more, whereas in fact there hasn't been any real change. And Ben Wallace, the former defense secretary under the Conservatives, is very straightforward about the process by which defense spending figures in the UK are arrived at. He calls it, quote, total fraud, unquote.
Yeah. Well, we Finns, we have a crazy economist who are very theoretical, and I have my bone to pick with them, but one idea is that because we have a conscription, we should calculate the true economic worth of the labor spent there. Of course, they get paid shit, but the labor contribution is like quite huge. So we could go from our 2 point something to 3 by that trick alone. So, but then of course the tricks don't create real defense. So I guess you need to have a real competencies. And I must really admire the sort of Finnish army thinking. We always had this kind of there's budget, but let's put this on the most critical thing we can do. And it used to be the F-35s. Let's hope that they don't have the American kill switch. But now we are no doubt getting rid of the Ottawa Agreement and putting the mines back on the border, and then buying from Israelis the David Sling, and just the sort of lots of build up on the drone capabilities. So it's I'm actually pretty relaxed. Russia will not do any of the tricks with Finland, but
which is precisely the point. Who will defend Europe? The countries that are actually prepared to defend themselves. So Russia can look for softer targets elsewhere in Europe.
Yeah, but I think the Baltic should just start conscriptions and rearm. I see no other way around this.
Oh, they are doing.
Yeah,
that is precisely conscription lapsed in Baltic countries and now has been restarted because they understand the problem.
Yeah, I don't know. On the UK, I guess it's. Having lived there 13 years, it's also people are. When you look at the polls where you ask, are you willing to defend your country? It looks so weak in the more west you go in Europe. Yeah. Like people are really just don't. I don't know. It's naive, or they just really think a couple of 100 kilometers will make the difference.
Well, you can forgive Western European publics for thinking that they are insulated by distance and they're protected by the fact that they're at the far end of the continent from Europe, because after all that is what they have been told by some of their leadership figures, including very senior military officers who really should know better. because if you are a British naval officer, there is absolutely no excuse for saying that there is all of Europe between us and Russia, because naval officers know perfectly well that the world is not flat. It's a globe. And so when Russia's long-range aviation flies around the top of Norway, and they have a straight missile shot to the UK. So to ignore that and to pretend that actually everything is okay is a stunning dereliction of duty by our leadership figures.
Yeah, and that's what I didn't like about the kind of... you have this English journalist, Douglas Murray, and he's a bit on the edgy guy. But I admire some of his theories, like the war on the West. That it's just a sort of a self-harm and the kind of the Eastern influence. And your book also, and the previous, deals with the kind of the Russian psyops and trying to manipulate and weaken people. But part of that is that kind like a utter naivety on like the real politics and power and army matters, and that I definitely didn't like the old woke times, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the how Russia gets its way without rolling tanks across the border was the subject of the previous book, which was called Russia's War on Everybody, and that was about the impact on individual people around the world, even if they think they have no argument with Russia whatsoever. And of course, that too has stepped up in the time since that book was published in 2022, and now one of the biggest concerns across Europe among people who are watching and tracking these things is when these sabotage and arson and murder attacks that so far have been isolated pinpricks, if they come together as a mass coordinated effort to immobilize Europe, how prepared is Europe to actually deal with that, particularly those countries that have not taken civil defense and resilience seriously?
There was a Heathrow fire, which could have been kind of a test ball, like let's try this.
It's an entertaining theory. Whether or not Russia or anybody else had anything to do with this is open to doubt. It is looking very much as though it is another problem and another syndrome altogether, which is the deprioritization of resilience and survivability of critical national infrastructure, and not actually working through all of the things that could go wrong, even in peacetime, before you come under armed attack. Because if you prioritize economics or net zero over common sense, then you are going to have a resilience problem.
Yeah, and then in the Baltic Sea, of course, which is should be in our NATO lake. The Russians have used the shadow fleets to cut the cables and stuff, but now we are wising on that, and I guess we have sort of the signal defense watching every ship nowadays, and sort of cut that crap, and we can even board the ships and confiscate them if the things get. But I guess if we lose the economic sanctions and get soft on Russia, then everything goes again.
Well, naturally, because why would Russia stop?
Yeah, and it's really bad incentives, and I don't know. Let's hope our American friends will see the light, and I don't know, get some competence in the top of the administration.
Well, again, why would they stop? Because there is nobody at the moment standing against what this small group of individuals want to do and the direction that they want to take the United States in. There are plenty of people who see how catastrophic it is, and not just for the rest of the world, but for the United States itself. But what are they doing about it? We don't see any visible resistance because the plan has been so well developed that they have taken into account intimidating and cowing anybody that might be willing to stand against it and to attempt to uphold rule of law. And that's being pushed through very effectively at the moment.
Yeah, then just what we can do about it. If you take the MAGA playbook, they have a 30% or less GDP share of public spending. So the federal spending is about 20%, and the local spending in the States is about 10%. And Britain, Finland, we have well over 40%, and the hefty deficit, annual deficit on top of that. If we go for make Europe great again, perversely what the Americans are doing with the trust is like helping Europe to get great again, because now there's a huge movement and trying to find a European solution for American offerings. And I can see that as an investment banker, people are prices are going up on the defense stocks and even software, which can replace the American critical software, which because if you don't trust them to kind of play by our rules and cut the critical infrastructure, then you have to be self-sufficient. But the only rule I see us getting enough spending power on military and the real things is to get real on the economy. And I see no other way than to cut the social program in Europe. I mean, it's just can't afford those two things at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that I track in the book, the way in which it's not a straightforward correlation, but there is a mirror effect between the reduction in spending on defense and the increase in spending on health and welfare, particularly in the UK, where you have a massive bloated health system, even separate from welfare payments, which sucks the life out of the economy, but is constantly being told that it is not sufficient and it needs to spend even more on it. So the way in which the welfare and immigration has put an immense burden on the UK economy is unfortunately too politically toxic a subject for any previous government to have dealt with, and anybody that touches the stove gets their fingers burnt every single time because of the number of decades over which it has become an established truth within British political life that you have a lot of people that you need to support, and you need to bring in more people that you need to support, and that is simply the way of the world. So the political will that would actually take to change that will probably take a lot more than we have actually seen from this government now, but it's becoming more and more urgent.
Yeah, and let's hope people will start taking the world seriously and not living some kind of a dream world where everything will be just fine if you just wish harder and regulate a bit more and spend a bit more on transfers. I wish all the best for Europe, and let's hope this too shall pass over. And it looks dark, but let's just get real. And I wish all the best for my former city, London. I was there 13 years, so I have had Keir Giles as my guest here, and on his book Who Will Defend Europe. It's available in Finnish, so please consider buying. And if you listened so far, please subscribe to the channel. And I suggest for my paid subscribers, if you go to the Inside channel, and we talk a little bit about your other job, which is to work as at the Chatham House. Would that work for you?
Okay, very good.
Yeah, there's I guess a famous rule on Chatham House that you can talk, but you can't tell. Is that correct? It's
not exactly that. You can talk, you can tell, but you can't tell who told you what you're telling.
Excellent. So there's more in the Inside channel. Let's see there.